He guilty. He definitely did that shit. Hi guys, welcome back to the Shannon Show. Hello if you're new. Today's video is going to be a spoiler review of the documentary Jeffrey Epstein, Filthy Rich, which just dropped on Netflix today. Feel free to comment down below your thoughts on my commentary. I'm always up for a chat, I'm always up for a debate, and if you like this video, give it a thumbs up, and if you didn't, give it a dislike. No hard feelings. So let's get into the review. So of course the Jeffrey Epstein case is a pretty famous case, and I'm guessing if you watched this documentary you already at least had an idea about it. I personally had not done thorough research on this case because it's quite a dark case, some dark details in this case. But of course, I guess there's a lot of interest in it because it confirms some of the conspiracies going around about the rich and the powerful and the things that, and the depraved things that they get up to. So I think that's probably what the main interest in this case is. So I definitely knew he was involved in some sort of paedophile ring. I definitely knew about the Prince Andrew involvement. In terms of what I knew about the victims, from what I read, it was just prostitution. Those are the only two things that I heard. So I went into this documentary hoping to get a bit more details than I already had. So going into the documentary, it sets the tone. We've got Jeffrey Epstein at what looks like a deposition or a pre-trial of some sort, and they basically ask him, did you solicit prostitution in this state, in this state, in this state, in this country, in Paris, in Florida, in Mexico, all of these different places? And he's just saying, I plead the fifth, I plead the fifth, I plead the fifth, I plead the fifth. Like, it was ridiculous. So coming into this documentary, I was just like, well, this is some shit. So the documentary starts off with this journalist who was hired by Vanity Fair to write this story about Jeffrey Epstein. And at first it was kind of just looking like, you know, a business profile in terms of Jeffrey Epstein. You know, he was this big, powerful, influential guy, but nobody really knew how he came into. So she was kind of wanting to get details of that, and she was kind of trying to get, you know, people to talk about him, put her in contact with somebody saying, you know, a past employee of Epstein had a bad experience with him and she's willing to talk to you about it. So obviously she was quite interesting. Obviously a journalist, you know, you're meant to be doing this business profile. He looks airtight, and suddenly somebody's saying, well, he's not this perfect businessman. As a journalist, you're going to be intrigued about that. And that's when we get our first victim statements. It was concerning these two sisters, and the older one was hired by Jeffrey Epstein as an artist. Her distinct artistry style was, you know, young girls who were going through puberty. It was very voyeuristic. She says that it wasn't sexual, but obviously with the pictures that we saw in the documentary, it's looking a little questionable. I'm not gonna lie. And I'm not gonna lie, her taking suggestive pictures of her little sisters that were going through puberty, who were going through puberty. Now, we don't actually know for sure what these pictures actually look like, but if they're an exact copy of the paintings that we saw in there, it looked a little bit weird. It looked a bit like that Miley Cyrus spread on Vanity Fair. It did look a bit strange as to why you would want to take pictures of your little sisters like that and then paint them. Obviously she says it was non-sexual, but then she also says it's voyeuristic, which I feel like it's just a clashing of words here. It's non-sexual, but it's meant to be voyeuristic. You know, I'm not gonna lie, that was a little bit weird. That was a little bit dodgy. That this much older man was interested in these pictures as well. Was interested in this as well. A part of me, I'm not gonna lie, is kind of thinking, did you not think he was a little bit of a weirdo? But obviously that's her art, that's her artistry. Some rich man is now interested in her art. She's probably thinking, great, you know, this is every artist's dream, to be able to make a living off of their art. And in her head, she was probably thinking, well, this guy gets me, he appreciates my art, he's willing to put his dollars behind it. You know, this is perfect. So all of a sudden, they get talking and he starts asking her if she's got any siblings. You know, casual conversations, have you got any brothers or sisters? Okay, that could seem normal. But when she says, yeah, I've got a younger sister, he started to get interested. And bearing in mind, he's just bought pictures, you know, so his sudden interest in your sister, I'm not gonna lie, wouldn't you think, okay, maybe this is getting a little bit creepy now? So suddenly now he wants to help this sister that he's never met, and he wants to help her out, get her a good education. And I can definitely understand the sister thinking, well, this is perfect. He wants to help my sister out. He's got lots of money. This is probably nothing to him. If he's a billionaire, him paying for her education is what? Nothing to him. So I can understand why she thought it was innocent. But this whole setup of him organizing the holiday, this little trip that's meant to be beneficial to her education, she doesn't even have private accommodation. She's staying with them. You know, the sister hasn't even known Jeffrey Epstein that long at this point, but yet she's sending her sister off with him and his girlfriend alone to some trip. And obviously the sister's underage at this point, so the parents have approved it as well. You can't help but think, shouldn't there have been a bit more safeguarding going on? But again, I could understand, they seem maybe on the surface like good people. They are together, so why would they have any interest in the daughter? This is obviously just them being nice, being philanthropists. But obviously we find out very quickly that wasn't Jeffrey's intention to help out this girl from the goodness of his heart. And unfortunately, she was preyed upon. She decided to not say anything about that situation when she got back. And I can definitely understand why she wouldn't want to say anything after such a horrible, traumatic thing happened to her. I can understand her not wanting anyone to know or not telling anyone about it. I thought what the timeline was. They weren't really clear about the timeline, but at some point Jeffrey Epstein asked the older sister to move into his residence and become an in-house painter. And obviously if you're a painter, somebody's a millionaire, you know, multi-millionaire, billionaire is asking you to be their resident painter. This is an amazing opportunity. But then one day, obviously Jeffrey Epstein asked her to come into his room or something like that, and asked her for a foot massage. And that's when I was like, foot massage and you're a painter? And like, okay, this is clearly dodgy. Why the hell are you asking me to massage your feet if I'm a painter? Like, I'm not here to be a masseuse. But of course, I can understand why she did it. Said that obviously he had given her this big opportunity. She didn't want to be ungrateful, because, you know, sometimes you don't do things people say, they'll take opportunities away from you. She's probably thinking, foot massage, yes, it's a bit creepy. Yes, he's obviously abusing his power here, but it's a foot massage, it's a minor. And obviously the foot massage unfortunately turned into an assault, and very instantly she left that situation. And I think after that situation she was suspicious just about if anything had happened to her sister on that trip. She, you know, confronted her sister and said, you know, did anything happen? The sister confessed, and after that the relationship was locked off, and she actually did report those incidents to the police. She did that once she had went back to her place of residence in New York, but because the act didn't take part in the state of New York, the New York police said they couldn't do anything about it because it wasn't in their jurisdiction, but she could report it to the FBI. She reported it to the FBI, and she didn't hear back from the FBI. So from that, I was kind of thinking, okay, well, he probably has friends in the FBI, because even if nothing comes of the case, usually you probably hear back from the people saying, we're not going to take your case any further. But the fact that she didn't hear anything from the case, there was some dodgy stuff going on with the FBI, absolutely. So obviously, what can you do now? You've gone to the police don't want to do anything. This guy is at large, and the sisters decided to go to the press, because the press is pretty powerful. Sometimes the police don't want to do anything, and then when it gets traction in the press, suddenly now the police want to do some stuff. And I think it was very brave of them to go to the press as well, considering Jeffrey Epstein was clearly this powerful guy. I mean, you called up the FBI and they didn't get back. But obviously, the journalist had to fact check with Jeffrey Epstein about this story. And obviously, when Jeffrey heard that the sisters were speaking out about him, he obviously was not happy and he was trying to lock off this article. He was basically calling the journalist. The journalist was pregnant at the time, and he was like, you know, I know you're pregnant. I know all the hospitals in New York. I know all the doctors. And if you want your babies to survive, you best know what's good for you. And what I found quite interesting is, I'm not really sure if they confirmed it or not, but I believe that the journalist still wanted to go forward with the story. And I was just thinking, wow, you're actually brave and courageous, and I commend you for actually still wanting to continue that story. Because I think if somebody threatened me and I was pregnant, sorry girl, I'm definitely going to have to look off this story, because, you know, Jeffrey Epstein definitely could have got that done, definitely could have got her babies killed. I'm pretty sure he could have done that. And then after he put pressure on the journalist, he also put pressure on the editor-in-chief of Vanity Fair at that time. And the journalist alleges that the editor-in-chief was sent a severed cat head, I believe, and a bullet. So after that, the editor-in-chief was shook and he was like, nah, the story isn't running. And the article had to be solely about Jeffrey Epstein as the business person. So obviously that was a big disappointment for the sisters. But I don't know. I guess some people will say, well, you know, Vanity Fair should have done the right thing. They should have done right by those sisters. But if somebody is threatening you, if somebody who is powerful and has influence is threatening your life, I can definitely understand why they would buckle to that. Obviously, the editor-in-chief at the time put out a statement saying they couldn't put the story out because it didn't meet their legal threshold, or the sisters basically were saying that they wouldn't agree to take the fall if the Vanity Fair ended up getting sued, which of course is ridiculous. Who the hell is going to agree to that? But it's clear they were threatened and they were shook and they pulled the story. And even though perhaps it was the morally wrong thing to do, like I said, if somebody's threatening your life, you know, self-perseverance, it's incredibly sad. It is cowardly. But when someone's threatening your life, you know, you got to do what you got to do. But what do you guys think? Do you understand Vanity Fair pulling that story, and were they wrong for that? Or do you understand why they would pull the story after their lives were threatened? And that was just a little insight into some of the ways that he groomed people. He will tell women he had a great opportunity for them, and then suddenly he's asking them for a massage, and then they end up being assaulted. And even though there was clearly red flags in this situation, I just like to stress that the blame and the responsibility is solely on Jeffrey Epstein and his co-conspirator, Ghislaine. Also, I think she's just as bad. The older sister kept being threatened by Ghislaine, Jeffrey Epstein's girlfriend, basically calling her up every month or so saying, I know where you live, don't do anything stupid, or, you know, it's not going to be good for you. And literally she started moving from state to state. She even ended up moving to the mountains. She changed her name. And every time she'd move, she'd get a call from Ghislaine threatening her, harassing her. And I was just kind of thinking, it was just very weird why Ghislaine would be doing this. And this Ghislaine bitch is absolutely evil. I really believe she really enjoyed calling up these girls and threatening them. I think she definitely got a kick out of it, because most people would send other people to do their dirty work. But the fact that she's doing it personally, she clearly got a kick out of threatening and scaring these poor girls. So then that kind of takes us onto the next section of the victimization and where he did stuff. So the next location, and a large location of this documentary, is Florida mansion and the things that went on there. So after a while of Jeffrey Epstein living in Miami and living in his fancy and big mansion, the police kept getting calls by his neighbors that they were seeing young women, that they were concerned about young women coming in and out of Jeffrey Epstein's house. So obviously the neighbors had a pretty good idea what was going on. And I think the police definitely had a good idea what was going on. Mothers were calling up saying that their stepdaughters were coming home with large amounts of money, and when they were pressing them about where they got this money, they said that they were paid to give massages to old men in Jeffrey Epstein's house. But he wasn't arrested even after those numerous calls, and I think probably the reason why is that they wanted to get enough evidence to actually nab him with something, which I think was the smart thing to do, because even when they had so much evidence, it was still very difficult to convict Jeffrey Epstein. So I can definitely understand why they wanted to kind of wait to gather some evidence. So the story that was going around was that these young girls from high school, because there was apparently a lot of high schools in Miami, these girls would get approached either by one of their classmates or somebody else. I don't know how the first person got approached, but there was a kind of system where other girls would recruit other girls, and girls would say, look, if you go to this guy's mansion and give some massages to a couple old guys, they're going to give you $200. It's only 45 minutes, easy money. And the girls would end up going there, things would go left, and they'd end up abused. Now, again, let's talk. So, some people might say, why would these girls go to this mansion and agree to clearly dodgy arrangement, clearly dodgy job? And I have no doubt that these girls knew that what they were doing was dodgy. Even a 16-year-old girl knows that. But I can understand why they did it, because I think they generally thought, yes, it's creepy, it's inappropriate, but all we're doing is oiling someone's back. All we're doing is massaging someone's back, and I'll get $200. I think that was the rationale. So I can definitely understand that naivety, because they generally thought that was all that was going to happen. And even in a legal setting, things like this exist. These are real legit businesses where usually old men get massaged by young pretty women. But obviously in these places that are legal, there is safeguarding here, but there wasn't safeguarding any sort of safeguarding in this situation. So one victim that is in it says, obviously, she had, $200, all she has to do is massage some old person's back. Easy money, why not? She needs some money, so why not? She gets to the mansion now, massive mansion. She gets to the door and they're saying, if anybody asks you, just say you're 18. And some people might think, well, that is another red flag. But if you're already getting into this situation, like I said, it's dodgy, but you're just thinking you're massaging some old man's back, no big deal. So if somebody asks you if you're 18, just say that you're 18, I'm guessing might have made some people feel like, but we're kind of just like, okay, that kind of makes sense. You're in a mindset when you're living in this bubble where nothing bad happens to you, or nothing bad is going to happen to me, I could understand why some people would go for it. And instantly, once they get into the room, they're told to take their clothes off. And obviously, they're in this massive mansion, this big mansion. It's just them and this guy that can easily overpower them. Yes, there could be some people that would be like, oh, hell no, I'm leaving. But I think a lot of people are going to be scared. A lot of people are going to be intimidated. A lot of people thinking it's going to be safer for me and I'm going to be in a better position if I just comply. So the clothes are off, it's getting a little bit dodgy, and then the assault happens. Epstein had set up these girls and he had targeted these girls. Epstein definitely gets a kick out of this. With the amount of money that he has, he could easily just hire a prostitute who was a willing participant. He thrives off of these fear, and it's unfortunate that these girls have had to be victimized just for him to get some sort of sick thrill out of this situation. Sorry guys, change the scenery. But as I was saying, so I guess the next key part of the documentary, which I found quite interesting, which I think is going to split viewers and create some sort of debate, which is why I want to talk about it, is the whole recruiter situation. Now, there was two people who acted as recruiters for Jeffrey Epstein, who were his actual victims that turned into recruiters, and I guess you could say pimps, and I guess you could say pimps for Jeffrey Epstein. And I guess the argument that I think the documentary was trying to form, that these girls were groomed and that they were victims in this situation, almost absolving them of what they did as recruiters. And I disagree. I agree that they were victims, they were victimized. The two people in question were victimized. I think one showed a little bit more remorse than the other. In the beginning, one was adamant that they weren't at fault here, that they were manipulated and groomed. Later on, they did talk about their guilt, and then one was basically saying, yeah, they felt very guilty about what they did. So the person I'm going to focus on in particular is the first recruiter, which I think people are definitely going to have a problem with. So she ended up in the situation. She was told the same thing the other girls were. Okay, yeah, it's a bit creepy, but it's an easy $200. Things went left, but she actually resisted. Obviously, a lot of the other girls were scared. They didn't know what was going to happen to them if they didn't comply. So in the setup that she wasn't as violently brutalized as the other girls, but things that definitely happened to her which would be classified as assault. But she resisted his attempts to escalate things when the massage went. And then he propositioned her to say, well, if you bring me more girls, I'll give you $200. And that's what she did. And she confessed to bringing in around 30 to 40 girls for him. Now, she didn't specify whether she was very transparent with the people that she was recruiting, what was going to happen. Because in the documentary, we do see some people going in completely blindsided, people leaving them in the rooms, people coming into the room with them and then leaving them in the room alone. A lot of that dodgy business going on. She wasn't very explicit about that. I think maybe it might have been slightly better if the girls knew explicitly what was going on. Then there'd be an argument there of grooming, coercing, stuff like that. But if it was in fact that she just only told the girls, oh, you have a massage, it's easy $200, and didn't tell them what was going to go down after, then I struggle to see her as this victim who was manipulated and groomed. I just feel like if something like that happened to you, even as a 16-year-old, you wouldn't, whether you're 16, 15, 14, 13 or younger, you wouldn't want that to happen to somebody else, let alone your friends, your peers. You wouldn't want that behavior repeating that. And at 16, you were mature enough to know that. She was mature enough to know the situation that she was in was wrong. She knew what was happening in that situation. So why would you then put other people in that situation and then now claim victim? And then on top of that, even if she was transparent, it's very clear that this Jeffrey Epstein guy didn't know boundaries. His thing was, taking things further than people wanted. So I'm sorry, I feel like she's obviously not as bad as Jeffrey Epstein and his co-conspirators, but she was wrong. She was definitely wrong for that. And I think it's a bit cheeky to say, well, I was victimized by him, I was groomed by him, when it's very clear there was one motive here, which was money. Because if he said, just bring me some girls and there's no money in it for you, you wouldn't have done it. So I just think like a bit more responsibility should have been taken there, and she was wrong for that. Nothing happened to her. She wasn't charged. I guess they went easy on her because she was a victim. But victim or not, sis was wrong. I don't agree with this whole she was a victim and she did this because she was victimized and traumatized by him. I don't buy it one bit, I have to say. But I've got to ask you guys, do you think that that teenager who was the recruiter was wrong, or was she simply just groomed and manipulated? I gotta know. I don't buy it, sis. And then we move on to, I guess, another story of the people who went back. Because we heard a story for Survivor. It happened to her and she never went back. But then we see a story of somebody who did go back. She talks about why she went back. And she was, I guess she was recruited, but she was unknowingly recruited. So she wasn't even told what was going on. She was just told by her friend, I'm going to this rich guy's house. I don't want to go by myself. Please come with me. She went as, I guess, support, and she was blindsided. She was put in the room. She was left in the room alone by her friend, and she was unfortunately abused. And her friend is an absolutely horrible human being, and that's another reason why I cannot sympathize with that other victim who turned into a recruiter, because they definitely knew what they were setting up their fellow peers for. And it happened to her, and she ended up going back repeatedly. And some people might say, well, why would you go back to be traumatized and brutalized and abused again? And I can understand why she did. And if you look at her backstory, she came from a broken home. She witnessed a lot of abuse. She came from a poor family, and her outlook wasn't that great anyway. So I can definitely see, well, my life is shit. It's been full of abuse. So, you know, perhaps at the time she was numb. She perhaps processed it as, well, I've been abused. My life is shit. So why don't I just do this, and at least I'm getting paid? And I think that's why she went back, because of the money. And I think perhaps she was also naive. She was young at this point, thinking, well, I'm used to this. I'm used to this. I'm used to this feeling. So why not just get paid? And I think she was definitely naive to the fact of how it was going to affect her in later life. And at the end of the day, these people knew that they were taking advantage of a vulnerable person from these people, and these people preyed on people like her specifically to do these things to. So after we hear all of the testimonies from the Florida case, the documentary then progresses on to the actual investigation. And there was one police officer in particular who was the kind of the spearhead of nabbing Jeffrey Epstein, and he had been gathering testimonies from some of the girls who had been victimized by Jeffrey Epstein. What was really refreshing when we saw the clips, he made very clear to the victims that they had done nothing wrong, which was refreshing to see, because with cases like this, there's been quite a few testimony/interrogation videos that I've seen of people just, you know, asking lots of victim blamey questions. So I think that was definitely refreshing to see, because regardless of some of them knowingly going into a potentially sketchy situation, absolutely none of that justifies anything that happened to them. So they were gathering up all of these testimonies. They were hoping that they'd have a strong base to work off of with these testimonies. So they decided they were going to go for Jeffrey Epstein, and a warrant was issued to search Jeffrey Epstein's house. But when they got to Jeffrey Epstein's house, it was very clear that there was a cleanup operation, and somebody had tipped them off. Obviously, there was an inside guy who tipped him off, and in the documentary, we basically saw testimonies from people basically saying that Jeffrey Epstein had insinuated that he owned the police department. So I definitely think there was an inside man there. I feel like it's definitely conceivable. So in terms of bringing Jeffrey Epstein to justice at that point, it was not looking great. There was a lot of things going on with the case, and it just kept getting messier and messier. It kind of looked like he was going to get off. The charges that they could get him on were not the ideal charges, weren't charges that were going to put him away for a long time. Obviously, on Jeffrey Epstein's side, there was numerous sexual offences. But I think it was 2006, 2005, the first time he's being brought into the courts. The only charge that stuck was, I think it was a count of soliciting prostitution and a second count of soliciting prostitution of a minor. Nothing about having sex with minors, nothing about abuse, assault, nothing of that sort. So the charges are already not really looking that great. With those two charges, the maximum was 15 years. Obviously, Jeffrey Epstein was just doing anything and everything to try and get out of jail. He was putting the squeeze on the victims. He was sending private investigators out to intimidate the witnesses, shine lights into their houses. And there was one incident with one of the survivors. She called up the lawyer and she was like, you know, this guy's been following me and now he's posted up outside my house, shining a light through my window. The lawyer pulls up and starts taking footage of the private investigator, clearly badgering the witness, intimidating the witness. And the private investigator starts taking images and videos, almost like a tit for tat. And it was just so stupid. And I just feel like, you know, you've been caught out, just take the L. Like, do you feel like absolutely no shame? I mean, I guess the checks must have been so great that you really just couldn't feel shame because the checks were just so big. And obviously they had to go through the court system. They had to go through a court case. And the survivors in the documentary and were testifying against Jeffrey Epstein were expressing how embarrassing the court case was, because you've been victimized by this guy and the charges don't add up to your victimization. And on top of that, you are being labeled as a prostitute. Coming into this, I thought that's what it was. They were prostituting underage people. But when you look at the situation, it definitely was not prostitution, because these girls didn't know what they were getting into. Being paid to massage somebody's back is not prostitution. So him being charged with soliciting prostitution was already problematic and pretty much diminished what these girls had gone through. In this case specifically, them being labelled as prostitutes distances them away from their victimization. So obviously they had to go through that court case. You know, unfortunately how these cases go is the defense is going to rip these girls to shreds. And even now there's still stigma around prostitution. So you can imagine what they were going through in the courts. They were bringing up their history. They were bringing up how many abortions they had. Just ridiculous stuff. It's always tricky in that situation of, you know, people have the right to a defense. But it just doesn't sit right with me how some of the things that are allowed to ride in cases like this in court. So within this whole court case, there is another drama, and Jeffrey Epstein has managed to work his magic and cut a deal with the general attorney, a pretty sweet deal. Obviously, he was looking at 15 years. He managed to get a deal for 18 months. Nobody was allowed to prosecute him after this in any state that he was called into question. And all of his co-conspirators, who were either named or unnamed, would have immunity. So this deal was absolutely ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. People were trying to justify it. His lawyer was trying to justify it. I was like, this deal is actually ridiculous. Okay, reduced time, standard. But him not being able to be prosecuted again, ridiculous. Maybe, but not being able to be prosecuted in different states, I was just like, this is crazy. And then immunity for his co-conspirators, named and unnamed. Absolutely ridiculous. Absolutely ridiculous. I mean, it is just, you cannot even justify that. And it's actually ridiculous that they came out and tried to justify that. So I'm just kind of thinking, what have they got on this Attorney General? And what have they got on the other people? Because obviously this goes up in layers. It goes through one person, then it goes through another system, then it goes through another system, and then the Attorney General has to approve it. So what I think is either Jeffrey Epstein had some dirt on every single person at every single level, or they were partners and they were getting down to involved in the same activity, in the same depraved activities that Jeffrey Epstein was. Those are my theories. I'd love to hear yours. But all in all, that was ridiculous. And then the biggest slap in the face is that this was all done under the table, and the victims and the lawyers of the victims were entirely blindsided. They only found out in court, and it was just disrespectful how it all played out. They're in court. Suddenly Jeffrey Epstein and his lawyers are there shuffling, doing Chinese whispers with the judge. And then all of a sudden, okay, it's over, you know, he's going to jail now, but he's only getting 18 months, he's cut a deal. So obviously everyone is like, what the hell? Like, because generally the defense usually have a say, or at least have a chance to review any sort of deal. And usually it's the defense who have to coordinate with the prosecution to secure a deal. I'm not from America, so clue me up on the American system. Anybody who has a clue, please let me know in the comments. But from my understanding, the defense and the prosecution usually work together for any sort of deal. So, of course, everyone was like, what the hell? Like, this is just typical. Like, he's getting away with it again. He's getting a sweet deal. And surely this is illegal. And straight away they're just thinking, okay, we're going to file a lawsuit and we're going to get him that way. We're going to prove that this deal was illegal or shady, or we should have at least had a shoe in, and hopefully if that goes through, we can try and catch him again. But in the meantime, Jeffrey Epstein has got this great deal, 18 months in a county jail, not a federal prison. I'm not sure why. I'm not sure why, because I'm pretty sure soliciting prostitution is a felony. But again, correct me if I'm wrong. He got to serve in a county jail. He was on work release, so he was hardly in prison. So he work release 12. So for half a day, he wasn't in prison, and he got to do basically whatever he wanted, 12 hours a day, 6 days a week. He was given the best food. He was, you know, giving all of these privileges that other people weren't. He was given a TV. So really and truly, he was living it up. He was living lavish, basically. He had a few restrictions, but his life was pretty much the same. Which is, again, another slap in the face. You know, you've been victimized, you've been traumatized by this person. You've had to go on stay. You've had to go in a public court with all of these reporters here taking your statements for their hot pieces in their news outlets, being ridiculed by the defense lawyers, calling you all sorts of names, and then that's all that happened. I mean, I'm livid, and I'm pissed, and I wasn't even personally victimized, so I can only imagine how pissed off the actual victims were. And then, so on top of that, he gets out early, I guess, for good behavior. But I'm not really sure if there was even any good behavior to monitor, since he was hardly there. And throughout his parole, he was meant to be on house arrest, but he was just violating his parole every day. And it was like people had picture evidence of him violating his parole. And when they go to the parole board and they're like, look, he's violating his parole, like, aren't you going to do anything? There needs to be consequences. You know, most people who violate their paroles end up back in prison. Obviously, not the billionaire Jeffrey Epstein. And they were basically just like, well, and we're not going to do anything about it. So obviously those "and I'm not going to do anything about it" people were also paid, definitely. And it was ridiculous, because it's not even like he was breaking curfew or anything. He was flying out. It was absolutely ridiculous. After the parole and everything, it seems like his life went back to normal. People weren't distancing themselves with him. People were still being seen with him after this charge. Notable people were still being seen with him, interacting with him, entertaining him. I'll get into that a bit later. But yeah, it basically seemed like there was no consequences. Because he was just filthy rich. Like, is there any real consequences for you when you are filthy rich? Is there any real consequences for you when you're coming out of prison into a life of luxury? Juxtapose that with the victims. A lot of the victims said that after the whole case, their lives are miserable. Some of them fell into unhealthy habits, because a lot of these people didn't come from great homes or great life anyway, didn't get any real justice, and their monster is living it up, living carefree, and being victimized is enough to spiral anyway. But just that extra kick in the teeth, I'm not surprised some of them went through a rough patch. So let me move on to the survivors concerning his private island on the British Virgin Islands. And there was two notable people. There was one person, Virginia, who is probably, I can quote unquote, the most well-known victim. And there was another woman. But before we get into that section, we do hear another story of this model basically saying that Jeffrey Epstein had been duping a lot of models by saying that he could connect them with the people who are doing the Victoria's Secret show. They'd go to his hotel, he'd ask them to undress, and he'd try some stuff. The model in particular, thankfully, fortunately managed to escape the situation. She had reported it to the police, but she never heard anything back. And that basically follows on to this story. She met Jeffrey in New York. I'm not entirely sure on the timeline, so I'm not sure if she met him before or after his conviction. Correct me in the comments if I'm wrong. She had just come to New York. She was from a different country. She had decided she was going to go to New York because that's the land of dreams. She was on that dollar and a dream shit. She's in New York. She doesn't really have much money. And she ends up going to this club. I don't know what kind of club it was, whether it was like a normal club or a high-end club. But she ended up meeting some woman there. I forgot what her name is. And this model was like really nice to her and they made instant friends. And I'm not sure what the timeline was, whether it was literally just in one night or whether they had met on numerous times. But it sounds like it was pretty fast into the relationship. This woman starts talking about, oh, I have this friend. He's a philanthropist. She said philanthropist. I'm not sure if that word was used. I'm probably thinking she said she's got a rich friend. Because, homegirl survivor was definitely in New York, definitely looking for some ballers. She was probably thinking, well, she knows where all of the ballers at. I need to find me a baller because rent in New York is not cheap, honey. Yes, these are the type of connections I need, because not even just money, but connections as well. She's trying to be a model or an actress, I believe. And in those industries, connections are also everything. So like I said, the relationship progressed very fast and all of a sudden they're flying out to Jeffrey Epstein's private island. She's excited. She's getting flued out. When you're young, someone's like, I'm going to fly you out. You're thinking, yes, and you're there with your friend as well. He's there, but there's also a lot of other people as well. So the sheer number of people would probably make you feel safe. And at this point, there's no alarm bells ringing, because the way that this woman looked, she looked young, she looked like a model, she looked like she was down for a good time. This is the beginning of a good relationship. On the plane, they're flying to his private island, and that's when things start to go left immediately. So she basically says that just randomly on the plane, Jeffrey Epstein just starts having hardcore sex with some random girl on the plane in front of everyone. And she was saying how everyone was basically just pretending that they were asleep or pretending that they didn't know what was going on, or just like, tunnel vision. And that's when she said, she knew something was off. And, she was probably on the plane thinking, this isn't what I was thinking. This isn't the type of baller I was, this is not what I thought it was going to be. She was probably thinking, he's a baller. This is where all the ballers are going to be out, but it's going to be classy. But obviously, if you see that happening, you instantly know it's not the good type of rich. This is the creepy, weird type of rich. And at this point, what can you do? You're in the air at this point, and you're going to somebody's private island, an island which they own. It's not like, there is a police force there. This is this guy's private island in the middle of the Caribbean. So at this point, you can only pray at this point, because there's really nothing you can do at this point. And I can't even imagine what the survivor was going through, because I think at that point you are already mentally preparing yourself for whatever is going to happen next, because what can you actually do? What can you do? You're trapped. You're trapped. And the recruiter definitely set her up, definitely was a trafficker. And the recruiter is absolutely evil and definitely deserves to be brought to justice, because she definitely knew what she was doing, bringing the survivor along. So, like, literally within the first day, she's already been assaulted, and it's just continuous, repeat assault. I think it was like after day 2 or day 3, she was even thinking about just jumping into the sea and trying to swim to safety. And she was never going to be able to do that, because, I mean, the sea was literally just in the middle of nowhere. When she was just thinking about just jumping in the sea and swimming away, or tried to swim away, Jeffrey Epstein found her. And she was kind of thinking, well, how could he know where I am? And that's when she said she realised that there was 24-hour surveillance. So it was basically a prison on that island. If you weren't being there, if you didn't want to be there willingly, you were a prisoner. End of. And she basically said that everybody on that island knew what was going on. The luggage people knew what was going on. The people flying the plane knew what was going on. Everyone knew what was going on. And I definitely think absolutely everybody on that island knew what was going on, had a very good idea what was going on that island and what was happening to these people. But it's like, but even if they were to warn people when they came on the island and say, this is what's going to happen, again, this is his own private island. There is literally like no escape. So yeah, so she was just abused the whole time that she was there, which again is very unfortunate. In this documentary is Virginia, and she was a part of the island as well. I'm not sure where she actually met him, whether it was whether it was in New Mexico or Florida. I can't really remember. But she met him in one of the places where he was doing his dodgy business. And I'm not sure how she ended up in the mansion, because I'm not sure if she was there for a massage, because it sounded like she was just invited there. And she said that she was talking with Jeffrey Epstein and Ghislaine, and she had told Ghislaine that she wanted to be a qualified massage therapist. And Ghislaine was like, oh yeah, I can help you with that. Why don't you test out your massaging skills on, I think it was Jeffrey. I think it was either Jeffrey or somebody else. I think it was Jeffrey. And as she's doing the demonstration, she's telling them about her life. She's saying, she's had a rough upbringing. She's been abused. And, her life and her dreams. And she's thinking, as she's telling them this, they're going to sympathize with her. But it's very clear they're hearing this thing and thinking she's the perfect victim. And they obviously, like they have with countless other people, they took advantage of her and they assaulted her. And after that incident, Virginia was another person who went back. And I think with Virginia's story, I think what makes her story stand out is that the way that they took her in, and they would have normal moments together, like they'd watch movies and do normal things together. But then there was also that depraved part of their relationship, and it started to progress, and it was just not isolated to Ghislaine and Jeffrey Epstein, and they were basically just selling her off to anyone, politicians, powerful people, celebrities, a lot of people. And she was basically their sex slave. And again, I think the reason why she continued in this messed up situation was because her normal life was not that great. She was miserable in her normal life. So I guess, again, the rationale is, yes, I'm miserable here too, but at least I'm living a slightly better life rationale. And again, at the time, she was probably thinking she can just block out all of the bad stuff and didn't think that it was going to affect her. So I can understand on a level why she stayed, and Jeffrey and Ghislaine were definitely definitely taking advantage of her. So obviously within her being sold off to all of these people, the notable name comes up, pretty famous. I'm from the UK, I'm from London. The big name that is involved in this whole messed up paedophile ring situation. And of course, Prince Andrew. And Virginia, she gives her story. She says that Prince Andrew was there on the island, going everywhere with Jeffrey and Ghislaine, and she would often go to island with them. On the island, she met Andrew, and she was basically solicited. Ghislaine came up to her and said, "You've got to do the same stuff to Andrew that you do with Jeffrey Epstein." And I believe that he did it. I think the interview that we saw, the snippet that we saw, that interview was very damning. Him saying that he had no recollection of remembering Virginia. And don't get me wrong, and Prince Andrew probably has met lots of people in his life doing his royal duties. But nobody is going to forget going to an island full of young, pretty women and the antics that you got up to on that day. No man is going to forget that. Definitely not. So him trying to say that he has no recollection of meeting this girl when there's literally a picture of them together with his hand around her waist is just utterly stupid. I mean, if you're going to lie, at least try and sound credible. It was just that whole interview was a mess, because they asked him some other questions like why was he hanging around with Jeffrey Epstein even after his conviction, and he was saying, he doesn't know why, he can't answer that, and it was just absolutely ridiculous. So he guilty, he definitely did that shit, and I don't think there is anybody who actually believes Prince Andrew is innocent, maybe himself in the lies that he tells himself. There was an employee who said that he saw him with Virginia. They were in the pool, she was topless, and he was looking like he was having a good time rubbing up against her body. So I'm pretty sure that Andrew is guilty. And that relationship started to go left very quickly, and Ghislaine basically asked Victoria when she was just turned 17 that she basically wants Victoria to have Jeffrey Epstein's baby, but she was going to give her rights away, so that basically the baby was going to be theirs. And obviously she didn't want to do that, but obviously she's in this relationship where she can't say no to anything because she's their slave essentially. So she's like, yeah, but I want my qualification first because that's what I came here for. I came here for my massage qualification. So Ghislaine and Jeffrey Epstein's are like, okay, fine, we'll send you to Thailand to get your qualification. Then when you come back, you're going to drop this baby. So she's like, yeah. So they fly her out to Thailand. And at this point, I don't think she has an escort or anything. She kind of just goes there by herself. I think at this point, they're probably thinking they've manipulated her and they've brainwashed her so much that she's not even going to try anything. So we don't even have to send anyone out with her. But obviously in Thailand, she was just plotting her escape. And I think she wanted to leave that situation for a long time, but felt like she didn't, or felt like she had nowhere to go. And she met this guy, and within one night, she told him everything that happened. And they basically fell in love. And within that week, she married him. And then she called up Jeffrey. She was like, see ya. I'm not doing this anymore. I've met someone. I'm married. I'm not coming back. And she never heard from Jeffrey Epstein again. And I knew they were pissed that they lost their slave. But at the same time, I was just kind of thinking they probably had another Victoria. They probably had another girl lined up to take her place, unfortunately. But yeah, I'm happy she managed to get out. And I'm happy she managed to find love. She's still with that guy. They have a child now. They do the interview at their home. Their home looks really nice. So yeah, I'm happy to see that that Virginia is doing a lot better than she was. And she obviously, you know, after she had her baby, she decided she wasn't going to let Jeffrey Epstein get away with it. She wasn't going to let Prince Andrew get away with it. So that's when she started to do the interviews and started to get involved in the case. There was other people on the island. Bill Clinton was on the island. Jeffrey Epstein's lawyer or attorney was on the island. Quite a few people were on the island. I think the general consensus on the island, but not everybody was there for the parties and to engage in with depraved acts with minors. Well, not everybody was there to abuse people. Some people were there for dinners and parties, but definitely the people who flew in, even if they weren't a part of the disgusting acts, they definitely knew what was going on that island. And then after that, we hear about one final victim. I think she was brought in as for Jeffrey. Same story. He invites her to a room, asks her for a massage, and something happens. She also decided to continue working for him after that incident. Again, the same as the others, I get the rationale behind her choosing to continue with that, choosing not to sever that relationship and try and salvage some of the benefits of that relationship in terms of the opportunities that she could get, that she would not be able to get in her life without him. But I think there is an incident with that specific survivor that is going to raise a few eyebrows. Definitely raised a few eyebrows for me, is that she introduced her sister to Jeffrey Epstein after she had been assaulted by him, and assaulted by him more than once at this point. In her head, she rationalized it as, maybe he's just done it to me. I'm the only victim, and he's only done it to me. Again, I'm not sure what the timeline was, whether this was before or after his conviction, but that's how she rationalized it as. But I'm not gonna lie to you. If somebody had done that to me and I had made the decision to continue that relationship for the benefit of my career, I would not let my little sister near him. And even though it was not her fault, the blame of what happened to her sister lies solely on Jeffrey Epstein. I have to question that decision. I can definitely sympathize with her because she must feel so horrible, but I don't know, big sister, I just feel like it was not wise. It was definitely not wise. It definitely was not model big sister behavior. So let me kind of go back to the legal proceedings in terms of them filing a lawsuit against the dodgy deal that took place, and they managed to win that case, and which opens the door for them to take Jeffrey Epstein back to court. Now, Jeffrey Epstein was entirely blindsided by this time. I guess he wasn't paying people enough to notify him, but the police raid his house before he gets to intercept anything, and they find just a load of pictures of nude girls. I'm guessing a lot of them were underage, and it's not looking good for Jeffrey Epstein. And then also within that, we have the whole Me Too movement as well. Harvey Weinstein was obviously a big part of that, and he's somebody who was involved with Jeffrey Epstein as well. I think he either went to the island or went to different locations with Jeffrey Epstein. And after that, lots of people were coming forward. And what was quite interesting is one of the survivors went to the press in the 2016 tell them her story because it had relevancy to the election, because she was going to explain how lots of politicians, including Trump and Bill Clinton, had visited Jeffrey Epstein's island where all of these dodgy stuff was going on, and probably had knowledge of what was going on. But nobody really wanted to hear it. It was only after the Me Too movement that people now suddenly wanted to hear about what was going on in Jeffrey Epstein's property. So that is quite interesting, how people only really wanted to touch on women's issues and abuses of power once it became popular. The Me Too movement needed to happen, and I welcome that happening. It started encouraging people to come forward. Obviously, with the Epstein case, there was now new charges brought against him, trafficking charges brought against him, and more people were coming forward to testify against him. And obviously, the more people you have, the more credible the accounts are, and the more likely you are going to secure a conviction. So after that, it wasn't looking good. I think there was like hundreds of victims coming forward to testify. So it was not looking good for Jeffrey Epstein, and his money wasn't talking like it used to be, because he was trying to boast bail. He was trying to offer all of his money for bail, he was saying, let me post 500 million to make bail. And the judge just wasn't buying it, and the prosecution basically argued that he was a flight risk and he was too dangerous, so he should stay in jail. And in his New York home that they raided, they actually found several fake passports that he made. So if he was out of jail, he was definitely flying a helicopter and getting out of there and probably hiding out in some secluded mountain that he probably built for himself. So I think that was definitely the right decision to not grant bail. So he's been charged now. He's not made bail. He's in prison, federal prison. And it's looking good for the survivors. It's looking like they're finally going to get justice. This trafficking charge now is a maximum of 45. So that's basically a life sentence for Jeffrey Epstein. And he's going to be spending it in a federal prison. So there's not going to be many luxuries there. There's not going to be as many luxuries to try and score than as he did with the county jail. It's all looking good, and then suddenly he ends up dead. He apparently killed himself. Obviously, there's a lot of conspiracies flying around. Some people are saying he did kill himself. Some people are saying somebody killed him because he knew too much, and that he was basically going to snitch on people to get renewed time. I don't know, because the autopsy report apparently says that it wasn't perhaps plausible the way that his body was positioned for him to be able to strangle himself. Because it's not like he hanged himself. I'm not sure if he hanged himself or if he strangled himself. It's very unclear. So I'm thinking, well, from what the autopsy report is saying, it looks like either he had told somebody to kill him or somebody had killed him in his cell. And none of the cameras were working. The guards were asleep. It's all sounding very dodgy. One leaning towards maybe he did kill himself or organized himself to get killed was he moved his money. So that he moved his money, and obviously him moving his money would make it difficult for the victims to claim compensation, which is absolutely evil. I think victims of sexual assault are definitely entitled to compensation. We know we live in a world that is run by money, so I definitely think they're entitled to have money to alleviate at least something in their lives. And I'm personally in support of monetary restitution. I know some people are a bit iffy about it. I'd be interested to hear from you guys. Do you believe that victims of sexual assault, should be seeking compensation, or do you feel like criminal justice is enough? But obviously, to do that is very petty, very selfish, and very evil to do. So that could be leaning towards, okay, he either killed himself or organized somebody to kill him. From what I had seen from this documentary, I feel like if he was to have killed himself, it would have been after the sentence had been brought up upon him, after he fully knew he was going to get life in prison. Then him killing himself would have made sense. But before the trial, I don't think so. Especially since he's had a good track record of getting good deals. I think he probably would have wanted to test that again. So I'm probably thinking people got wind that he was ready to snitch on some people for less time, and they were like, we gotta kill him. And it's funny because once he went into prison, people started distancing themselves from him after they were happy to be seen with him after his first conviction. And I think I'm going to talk about the celebrities now, actually, just insert it in here. Celebrities in question. We have Trump. There's no surprise there. He even has his own allegations against him. I even saw something about him trending on Twitter about him having somebody killed who ended up pregnant with his baby after an affair. So, like, he's been involved in some very crazy and questionable, crazy stuff. But from what the documentary shows, even though he is a dodgy guy, even though some will say, yeah, he's a dodgy guy, it doesn't seem like he was doing anything dodgy per se at Jeffrey Epstein's island. Nobody involved in the Jeffrey Epstein business has come out and said he was a perpetrator there. Then we have Bill Clinton. He also has some people claiming that he has assaulted them. But again, nobody from Jeffrey Epstein's situation has said he had assaulted them in that case. Then we also see Chris Tucker on an aeroplane with him. Chris Tucker, the comedian. Again, nobody has said anything about Chris Tucker. I think nobody has made any sort of claims against Chris Tucker. I don't think Chris Tucker is a dodgy guy. Maybe he might have a few moral issues, but I don't think he is this secret undercover predator. But I definitely think he knew what Jeffrey Epstein was, and I think a lot of people around him knew what Jeffrey Epstein was, even if they weren't predators themselves, but they liked the access but they enjoyed the access that they had to him. They enjoyed the lavish holidays he threw. They enjoyed the lavish parties, the lavish dinners. So everything else, it was just tunnel vision. Yes, he's a dodgy guy, but he throws a good party, and he can connect me with this guy. So I think there was a lot of that going on. And even the employees all know. There was one employee that we saw who was hired by him to do the telecommunications in his house or whatever. And he was basically, he knew what was going on, but he was trying to talk himself into, maybe I didn't see what I saw. Maybe I didn't see somebody on the beach naked with two clearly underage looking girls with their tops off. Maybe I didn't see that, because the money was good, and when the money is good, you can definitely turn a blind eye to things. Until one person, who I'm not even sure why they were working there, was saying, "Why are you here?" And he was like, "I guess the money." And then the person was like, "Do you have daughters?" And he was like, "Yeah, I do have daughters. I have two young teenage daughters." And he was like, "Well, would you let your teenage daughters be here?" And he was like, "Absolutely not." And that's when he quit. And I was just thinking, it shouldn't have taken your daughters to know that you shouldn't have been here, and that being here was morally wrong. But okay, come through parent guilt. I personally would like to think that I wouldn't compromise my morals for a good check to that extent of hanging out with and ignoring the fact that this person that is giving me all of these great benefits is a paedophile and is victimizing all of these children. So on one level, I can understand why people were turning a blind eye. But on the other hand, I'm just kind of thinking, I mean, paedophilia. It's a big one to turn your blind eye to. And I got a side eye of Chris Tucker. I mean, Bill Clinton, Trump, I don't really think much of them anyway. But Chris Tucker, I'm not sure if is it cancel worthy. I'm not going to cancel Chris Tucker, but he definitely has some explaining to do. And I think perhaps an apology as well, because Chris Tucker definitely knew what Jeffrey Epstein was up to. Kevin Spacey, of course, again, allegations have come out against him. That's not really a surprise. But when you actually look online, you'll see a lot of your faves hanging out with Jeffrey Epstein. I think even after his conviction, there was some models, you know, Naomi Campbell, I love you girl, but girl, what was you doing? Just a lot of celebrities that have really got some explaining to do. So obviously, he ended up dead, unfortunately. The survivors in the documentary expressed to the fact that they were disappointed that they never got to see their day in court, and they never really got to see him brought to justice, and how him killing himself, essentially, what they're taking it as, is a bit of a cop-out from him. And yeah, I'd feel very cheated if my perpetrator killed themselves. I guess some people might think, well, good, he's dead. But I think it's a cop-out. I think rotting in jail is always better, in my opinion. Even if it was to be taken to the death penalty, I think rotting in jail is better, in my opinion. But the judge, obviously, I guess with cases like this, when the perpetrator, where the defendant dies, they have to close the case. But the judge did allow some of the victims to have their day in court and be able to say their piece, which of course was a nice gesture from the judge. And then, of course, I guess they had to close the case. And that was the end of Jeffrey Epstein. It's very unsatisfying, because it's almost like we almost had him. We almost, it would have been very satisfying to see his face when they were like, guilty, 45 years. And they're never going to get to see that. We're never going to get to see that. But I think it was great that we almost got there, at the very least. But, a harrowing thing that they kind of leave it on is that, Jeffrey Epstein is not the only one. He's not the only monster out there. There's so many other people out there that are still doing this. And I think that is the harsh reality, because, for every one Epstein there is captured, there is another 10 that are going to live and die as abusers that live a cushy life while doing all of these deplorable actions. I'd love to see more of them captured, but I think we're gonna keep seeing these exemplar cases rather than systematically every single powerful, deplorable human being that victimizes people will get to see their day in court. I still think it's going to be a very rare occurrence. Ghislaine definitely deserves to be looked up. His co-conspirators, all of those models that were acting as recruiters, deserve to be locked up. Especially Ghislaine. Ghislaine definitely needs to be next. I don't understand how she hasn't been indicted on anything. I feel like she was just as bad as Jeffrey Epstein, just as bad, and she was present in a lot of these abuses, and participated in a lot of these abuses. And I guess one part of me is just like, why would she join in? And there's one. I feel I have either two theories. One, she's a sadistic person. She's also a psychopath. And the second one is, I guess actually three. Second one is she's also a paedophile, and she gets a kick out of watching Jeffrey Epstein get off to young children. And number three, she is derangedly, deeply in love with Jeffrey, and she would have done anything for him, including doing this. Strange type of love. Those are my theories. I'd love to know what your guys' theories is, but either way, sis needs to be locked up. I'd be interested to hear who you think should be prosecuted in this case as well. In the documentary, they also talk about how he actually came into his money. I'm not going to lie, I wasn't really that interested about it. I guess it was kind of interesting how he got his money, but I think what was the most interesting part about the discussion around his money was, I guess, the person who apparently helped him get his footsteps into becoming this billionaire, basically said that they regret helping him, because if he didn't have all of this money and all of this wealth, he wouldn't have been able to abuse all of these girls. I think without the money, without the power, then the number definitely would have been less. But I think by nature he was this depraved guy, so whether he had money or not, he was going to be preying on somebody. So obviously less money, less resources, there is going to be less victimization. But I don't think him having less money would have meant that he wouldn't have been this predator. But yeah, I guess that's kind of just like the plot and me discussion. I know I've rambled on a lot. I know this is going to be a long spoiler review. In terms of the documentary as a whole, I think it was a solid documentary. It's only 4 hours long. I do think it drags just slightly a little with the survivor testimonies because some of them interlap with each other. I think perhaps maybe they could have concised it down by, obviously some of these people had similar stories, but perhaps, you know, having that similar story and then kind of focusing on the different parts for each instead of having them repeat some of the stuff, if you get what I mean. But I also get that they wanted the survivors to have their day in court. In terms of bias in this documentary, I think it was very biased. It was very victim-centered. It was very Jeffrey Epstein is guilty and that's that. But I agree with that. I don't really think there's much to argue. I don't think you can really play devil's advocate in this case. I think it's interesting that we had his lawyer in it, and his lawyer was actually implicated by Virginia and said that he was at the island and she had to do stuff to him. And he quite frankly denied it, and he was like bold-faced, like, she needs to admit it publicly that I did this to her. She needs to do it. I challenge her to do it. And the way that he said, I challenge her, I was just like, he's guilty. Very guilty. It just sounded very defensive. And I think he's guilty. I think he did it. And the fact that he's Jeffrey Epstein's lawyer as well, and he was just making all of these excuses for Jeffrey and the dodgy deal that they made, he's not a very credible person. So I think he did what Virginia was accusing him of. But in terms of the structure of the story, I think that was told very well. Obviously, I didn't know all of the details, and I got clued up pretty well. I'm personally not going to dive deeper because it's just too dark and depressing. But I can definitely see this making people go and investigate further in this case. But if you think there's any key details in this case that you think I need to know, do link me any articles or stuff like that in the comments. In terms of the look of the documentary, I think it's a pretty classic documentary look. It is a bit of a high-end look, a pretty classic documentary look. You got archive mixed with interviews. It's not really a cinematic documentary, but with the subject matter that it has, I wouldn't expect it to have. The recreations I think were shot pretty well. I think their argument was pretty strong. There was some things that I didn't agree with. With their arguments I think the arguments that they put forward were pretty decent. I think it's definitely going to set a bit of a debate in terms of are the victims who turned recruiters as innocent or absolved of guilt because they were victims. I think the score was solid, decent. I would have liked to have seen maybe more people from Jeffrey Epstein's inner circle, but of course, you know, they probably just didn't want to implicate or talk about it. But it did a good job getting people, to be honest. I wouldn't think anybody would want to talk. So yeah, overall, I think it was a decent, solid documentary, and I think if you're interested in that case, I would check it out. So I think overall, taking everything into account, I'm going to give this documentary a solid 3 out of 5. But yes, I've talked a lot, so I'd love to hear what you think. Let me know what you thought of my thoughts, and let me know what you would rate it out of 5. Subscribe if you haven't yet, and if you have, don't forget to press that notification bell so you know when the next review is dropping. Till next time, guys, bye!